My name is Ted North, and I've had a lifelong passion of motorcycles, both in riding them and in renovating. I left school at 14 as an apprentice electrician, and one of my fellow apprentices had a motorcycle. We were working in a very open area on an airfield, thankfully, and so I quickly cadged a ride, and he taught me how to ride the thing. It was a little BSA Bantam, and I'm talking now about 1950. Soon after that, my brother and I bought our own bike. I say bike, it was most of a bike. It didn't work, it didn't run, there were parts missing. It was a 1931 350 Ariel with a hand change on the side of the tank. We stripped it completely into the cellar of my parents' house, even taking the paint off. We renovated it completely, and then I was able to ride that for a couple of years whilst other bikes came along. In 1953, I was called up into the forces, as we all were in those days, to serve national service. And I did in fact sign on in the Royal Air Force for 4 years in order to change my trade to become an aircraft fitter. Posted back to Norwich, where I was based. I had my own motorcycle to travel home on, 250 BSA at that time. To my then girlfriend, until we married in 1955, and we lived out of camp in accommodation. Having just come out of the Air Force, I spent one season in what was then known as scrambling, known as motocross, riding a 350 matchless, but when family came along, that wasn't too popular, so it was given up. I was then out of motorcycling for quite a period, in fact until my eldest boy became 16, bought his first moped, and then onto a motorcycle, and then my youngest son became 16, the same thing, bought a moped, and he actually bought a motorcycle before he had a license to ride one. I found that my car insurance covered me for that, so I was able to take him out, and hey presto, the bug was reawakened, and I've got to regain my interest in motorbikes. This is what I tend to call my engine room. It actually started as a scout hut because the previous people here to me were involved in scouting, but I've got a number of bits of equipment in there with engines, so it tends to be called the engine room round here. The engine room, of course, because I've got an old mower over there that I inherited when I moved in. These two are my sort of pride and joys, and if we move them both outside, it's a bit of a disease, you see, this motorcycling, because both my boys followed me into it, and others, grandsons now, are doing the same thing. I didn't have a bike of my own at the time, but when my two boys started motocrossing, I got a bit fed up with all the Japanese machinery laying around my garage, and a customer of mine, I was in the heating trade, had a motorcycle laying down his garden, and when asked what it was, he said, "It's my son's bike. It's been there 5 years because he's in Africa. So I said, well, ask him if he wants to sell it. In due course he did. I brought it home, not really knowing what I'd bought, but discovered that it was a 1961 Triumph Bonneville, which in its day was the sports bike to have. Road tested at 117 miles per hour, and had the fascination then of renovating it, and I still ride it to this day, having put it on the road in 1982. This is the 1961 Triumph Bonneville, rebuilt from basically a wreck, really. It lived outside for many years. Part of the attraction of getting an old bike is finding out where to get the spare parts. And I travelled from sort of Felixstowe to Wales to get parts from this in order to put it back into its original condition. I've ridden it since 1982 and done a lot of miles, 6,631, and it's been, I've had new cylinders and pistons on it in that time, but that's about all. Other than that, it's been very faithful. And this one also, which is the 1955 350 BSA single, rebuilt from a bike that was very original, but was in fact in very, very scruffy condition. But all the original parts were on it. It was just well used, and we swapped this for Kevin's 500cc Mako. One cold winter's night, we arranged to meet a gentleman from Somerset at Junction 3 on the M3, when the M3 started at Junction 3. And we met there in a frosty night, had a look at what each other had, swapped bikes, came back home. No money, no nothing. This one had a logbook with it, so it was fully registered and absolutely legitimate. But it was quite a nice little trade-in. My youngest son Kevin then became interested in trials riding and bought himself a Suzuki, and I followed him and encouraged him and supported him. And then I heard one day down at Nash Mills near Kings Langley a BSA riding round, and going to find the fellow riding it, he said, well, if you're interested in motorcycling, come down in a fortnight's time to Aldershot, where there will be 240 bikes riding around the Ministry of Defence land there. That was 1982. I did that, went to see the trial, became absolutely smitten with the bug, and in fact rode the trial the next year, 1983, on a little Triumph Cub that this same gentleman, Jim Susans, had introduced me to, and rode it then for about 10 years. I joined the Berkhamsted Motorcycle Club in 1982 and was eventually asked to join the committee, and in 1990 became the chairman. The club has progressed really well since then. Our membership at the time was about 70. Last year it was 364, with a lot of youth riders. I continued riding trials right up until last year, which was my 75th year, when I was tending to knock lumps off myself, so I decided I would then go into the administrative side, and I'm out most weekends observing trials. I'm still very interested in the Berkhamsted Motorcycling Club, being a vice president and vice chairman now. My name is Ted North, and I've had a lifelong passion of motorcycles, both in riding them and in renovating. I learnt to ride at the age of 15. I'm still riding now, not competitively on trials, but on the road some 60 years later. and the fascination continues with the renovation and finding out what they need to be, what they should have been, and what it will be by the time I've finished. This passion is shared by my family, my two boys, and I think it seems to be a disease that runs within families.